We all enjoy the historical footage, showing events from the past, like to learn from it, or just the thought of we are watching people living history's great moments from decades away. Or if the footage is close to the action, we like the thrill. We all watch it for different reasons. So today, I'd like to dedicate this video to the ones who made it possible for all of us, the combat cameramen. The ones who risked their life through the war to show the events to the public back then, and for us years later. Documented what happened on the fronts to show the life of the ordinary soldiers and generals. While we know some of their names, usually the only thing reminds us of them is the few frames shown at the beginning of the footage. A name, a date, and the unit name chalked on something. They were present in every theater of the war, with the troops on the ground, on the planes in the air, and on the ships out on the sea, recording everything. The historical film reels and photographs we see today came from various sources. Sometimes regular soldiers brought their own cameras and took pictures of the events, though this was not that common and mostly only happened with the US troops. On the American side, the war correspondents could be civilian reporters following the military units, or could be members of the armed forces. The civilian war correspondents were unarmed, usually wearing officer uniforms without military markings and special badges. They were officially civilian employees of the US War Department and were protected under the Geneva Conventions. On the other hand, the cameramen could also be regular enlisted men or officers who were assigned to the army's photo companies. These combat cameramen carried standard infantry weapons along with their camera equipment, though this was mostly just for self-defense, as carrying a full-size rifle together with sometimes 2-3 cameras would hamper them in doing their job. Though they were considered as regular members of the armed forces and expected to fight, but that was not their main role. They were there to document the events, which was considered important enough by itself. The same applied to their British counterpart, the AFPU, Army Film and Photographic Unit, where the cameramen were part of the armed forces, but they usually only carried revolvers. There were also quite a few pictures and films recorded by private individuals, mostly from non-combatant personnel like doctors and nurses traveling with the armed forces. Some of those you can find on here or on my secondary channel, like the IS-2 tank video I have recorded by Colonel Alexander Zabin, who was a surgeon in the US Army during World War II. Or the private videos of Beatrice Wachter, who was a nurse with the 51st Field Hospital. See the links in the description or at the end of this video. If we're talking about documenting the war, we should take a look at the cameras too that were used in World War II. To have a vague concept of the gear they were carrying, the cameras weighted about 6-7 pounds and the 37mm film roll weighted about 4 pounds and only lasted for a minute, so they usually carried 8 or 10 of those all the time. Speaking about the equipment, the most popular camera used to take pictures was the Speed Graphics, which actually means a series of cameras which started production well before World War II. But the specific model we are talking about is the PH-47. When in 1942 the US Army established the Army Pictorial Service, the Speed Graphics cameras were issued as standard equipment. They were included in the PH-104 photographer's kit, which included everything you need: the camera, filters, film packs, adapters, tripod, etc. These cameras actually were not easy to operate and were very delicate and easily damaged in a combat environment. Also, they only held one negative, meaning they had to be reloaded after every shot. But the weight, size and slow operation was balanced out with the great picture quality of these cameras, as the large 4x5 inches negative captured the events in great detail. A famous example of pictures taken by these cameras is the flag raising on Iwo Jima. For motion pictures, the most used equipment was the Bell & Howell IMO 35mm camera. It came in several models: single lens, 3 lenses, electric or spring-driven mechanism, which could be cranked with an outside accessory. The IMOs weren't ergonomical. They were quite heavy and only held about 100 feet of film, which was enough for 2 minutes of recording at 24 frames per second. They were usually handheld, as there was not much time setting up tripods while following the troops. The short shooting capacity is the reason most World War II footage is made up from several film reels and features very short cuts of scenes. They technically weren't able to take several minute long shots of the events while handhelding the camera. If used on a tripod, there were several modifications enabling the camera to hold and run a 400 or 1000 feet film, but those were heavy and cumbersome. An alternative to the IMO was the Cunningham Combat Camera, which was more lightweight with the use of magnesium. It was more ergonomical with a simplified loading mechanism and held 200 feet of film, but it was only introduced in 1945 when the war was almost over. The British Army's film and photographic unit's preferred camera was the WWII, nicknamed the lunchbox for its distinctive shape. Just like the IMO, it could take a standard 100-foot film, which allowed 2 minutes of filming at 24 frames per second. It used a similar hand-cranked or spring-driven mechanism. When we see color footage of World War II, it was usually shot with the Bolex H16 camera, using Kodachrome color film. It was not as common as black and white, and mainly used in more static placements. That's why we have more color footage from the Pacific, where they could set up the static cameras on the ships to film, instead of carrying them around. These shots from the Pacific were used to create some amazing color films from World War II, like The Fighting Lady. But since they had the color cameras there, the cameramen often did take them on foot to the islands, and thanks to them we can have a distant look of the struggles of the Marines too during the island hopping campaign. A great example of these movies is the feature film To the Shores of Iwo Jima. You can also find both of these films on my secondary channel. I recommend you watch them. So when we look at these World War II pictures or watch all this great footage, we should never forget the men behind the cameras, who often risk their lives to document these historical events so we can see them decades later and hopefully learn something from them. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.